The Young and the Restless. Spoilers. Thurdays. Full episodes. July 10, 2025. The morning light fell gently across the windows of the Newman estate, but for Victoria, the glow felt artificial. Nothing about this day, or the days to come, held warmth. Everything felt dulled by loss, weighted by an emptiness she could not articulate. The air in the house was too still, the silence too loud. And Claire, seated beside her in the living room, seemed more like a fragile reflection of her former self than the young woman Victoria had fought so hard to bring back from the darkness. The death of Cole had struck them both in different ways, but neither mother nor daughter could escape the sense that the world had shifted beneath their feet, leaving them stranded in grief. Victoria tried to reach for composure, to hold on to some semblance of strength, but when Claire turned to her with reddened eyes and whispered that she hadn't been sleeping, that she couldn't stop thinking about her father, it became clear that strength was futile. There were no easy words for this kind of pain. No platitudes sharp enough to cut through the fog of sorrow. Still, Victoria told her daughter to focus on the good moments. The laughter, the shared stories, the way Cole used to look at her with eyes full of pride. Claire nodded, but her expression betrayed a deeper question, one that eventually emerged in a broken whisper. What do we do now? Victoria paused. The question wasn't about logistics. It was about survival. How does one carry on when the anchor of their life has been cut loose? How does a daughter grieve a father she barely had the chance to know? How does a mother help her child navigate that impossible landscape? She told Claire the truth: there is no right way to mourn. There is only forward. That meant planning the cremation, the memorial, making choices about urns and verses and guests, all while their hearts were still bleeding. Claire had dreamed of Cole the night before. She told her mother about it softly, her voice barely more than a breath. He had come to her in sleep, smiling, peaceful, telling her to keep going. That she would be okay. It didn't feel like a dream, she said. It felt like a message. Victoria had once dismissed dreams like that, but now, in the silence of grief, she found herself clinging to any sign, any fragment of comfort. Claire asked if she could recite the poem Cole had once read at her own memorial, back when they had thought they had lost her. Victoria nodded, emotion tightening in her chest. Of course she could. It would be beautiful. It would be painful. It would be right. Later, as someone from the funeral home arrived with options for urns, the surreal nature of it all deepened. Claire couldn't look at the display table without her hands trembling. Victoria stood by her side, quietly offering her presence, her steadiness, knowing that there were no decisions here that could ever feel okay. Nothing felt appropriate when choosing how to house what remained of a man who had once filled every room he entered with laughter and intelligence. Claire touched the edge of a glass urn and whispered Cole's name as if asking for permission. Then came the call from security. Victoria took it in the hallway, her expression unreadable at first. When she returned, she looked at Claire and said, simply, "There's someone here to pay their respects." Before Claire could ask who, the front door opened, and in stepped Nate Hastings. He had come quietly, dressed in black, with a demeanor that matched the solemn atmosphere of the house. Victoria hadn't expected him, but a small part of her felt relief upon seeing him. He had always had that calming presence, a way of bringing gentleness into even the most chaotic rooms. He offered no speeches, no heavy condolences. Just a look, an embrace, and the shared weight of silence. He spoke briefly with Claire, offering her support and telling her that she was stronger than she knew. But mostly, he was there for Victoria. They sat in the sunroom, away from the funeral consultant and the urns, and Victoria allowed herself a moment to breathe. Nate didn't push. He asked how she was, not in the casual, social way most people did, but with the quiet gravity of someone who truly wanted to know. She told him she didn't know how to guide Claire through this when she herself was still lost. She spoke of Cole's final days, the unspoken words, the plans that would never be fulfilled. Nate listened without interruption, holding her pain like a fragile thing that needed protection. And when she paused, when her voice broke, he simply took her hand. Meanwhile, across town, not all was quiet. At Mariah and Tessa's shared home, tension had begun to build. Tessa had grown increasingly concerned for her wife. Ever since the revelations in France, Mariah had been on edge. But now, there was something else. A distance. An unease. Tessa had tried to bridge the gap, but each attempt was met with resistance. Today, however, the tension boiled over. Tessa had made a decision without consulting Mariah. A new project, a possible tour, something that would take her away for several weeks. She had hoped it would be a positive distraction, a way to reinvigorate their relationship. But when Mariah found out, her reaction was anything but supportive. She accused Tessa of abandoning her, of prioritizing career over family. The fight that followed was fierce, painful, filled with years of unresolved trauma that spilled out like poison from a long-sealed wound. Tessa tried to explain that she needed this, for herself, for their future, but Mariah couldn't hear it. All she could feel was abandonment. The same feeling that had haunted her since she was a child. The same feeling that resurfaced every time someone left. And now, as her grip on stability threatened to crack, she saw Tessa's departure not as opportunity, but betrayal. Back in the heart of Genoa City, another story unfolded, one of love, hope, and quiet courage. Danny Romolotti had been planning for weeks. He had the ring. He had rehearsed the words. All that remained was the moment. Christine had no idea. Their relationship had survived decades of separation, heartbreak, and fate's cruel interruptions. But now, as they found themselves in a rare moment of peace, Danny was ready to ask the question he had carried in his heart for years: would she marry him? He had chosen the park where they had once walked as teenagers, talking about dreams too big for the town they lived in. Now, older, wiser, and softened by time, he prepared to return to that spot with Christine. He hoped to remind her of who they had been and who they could still be. The ring was simple, elegant, just like her. The words he rehearsed were imperfect, but true. He had no idea that while he planned a proposal, the Newman family was unraveling under the weight of loss and ambition. That Cain was circling Cassidy first. That Mariah was crumbling. That Tessa was torn. That Sharon was preparing for war. Grief, love, betrayal, and ambition were all converging in Genoa City like a storm on the horizon. And at the center of it all stood a grieving daughter trying to honor a man she had only just begun to know, a mother trying to protect her child from the weight of that loss, and a friend who had shown up not to fix the pain, but simply to be there when it became unbearable. There would be more days like this. Days when everything felt broken. But there would also be days when love returned in unexpected forms. When old wounds found healing, when truths were spoken, when second chances took root in the soil of sorrow. And for now, that would have to be enough. The atmosphere in the Newman home was still cloaked in quiet mourning, as if the walls themselves were absorbing the sorrow that lingered in every breath. Victoria, though composed on the surface, felt the familiar hollowness of grief pressing against her ribs. The arrangements for Cole had only just begun. Cremation, memorial plans, poems to be read, but already the weight of those choices threatened to pull her under. She glanced at Claire, who sat by the window in silent contemplation, fingers absently tracing the edge of a framed photo of her father. There was a delicacy in her silence that frightened Victoria. It wasn't just grief, it was the loss of something unspoken between them, a time never reclaimed. Then came the soft knock at the door. Victoria hesitated, unsure whether she had the energy for another condolence or logistical discussion about urns and eulogies. But when she opened it, she found Nate standing there, his expression gentle, concerned, familiar. He explained that he had spoken to a colleague at the hospital who had shared news of Cole's passing. His tone carried the quiet reverence of someone who understood loss, someone who knew how to speak softly without sounding insincere. Victoria stepped aside and invited him in. There was no performance between them, no pretense. just the calm acceptance of a reunion shaped by tragedy. Claire greeted him politely, and the three sat for a while in the drawing room, the conversation flowing easily despite the undercurrent of sadness. Nate asked Claire how she was holding up, and she spoke of the dream she had, how Cole had appeared to her, told her it was okay to move on, that life was waiting for her beyond sorrow. Victoria listened with quiet awe, grateful that Claire could still dream of her father with such clarity and warmth. They spoke about the poem Cole had once read at Claire's presumed memorial, and how she now wanted to recite it herself, in his honor. Nate nodded in support, offering affirmations not just with his words but with his presence. When it came time for him to leave, he paused in the foyer with Victoria and said he was genuinely happy they were friends again. That whatever distance had once stood between them no longer felt necessary. Victoria smiled, a soft warmth touching her otherwise cold day, and replied that she felt the same. Then, without hesitation, she leaned forward and embraced him. It wasn't romantic. It was grounding. For a moment, the world stopped spinning. Elsewhere in Genoa City, a different kind of warmth settled over society as Christine and Danny shared a late lunch, surrounded by candlelight and low jazz murmuring through the speakers. They had chosen the restaurant not for the food, but for the familiarity. It was the same place they had run into each other months ago, the beginning of what had slowly grown into something neither of them could fully define: comfort, companionship, and the quiet spark of something once lost and now returned. They talked of Daniel, with Danny admitting his concern. He worried about his son's emotional state, his sense of purpose, the lingering wounds that hadn't healed since the chaos with Heather and Lucy. Christine listened, empathetic but cautious. She gently reminded Danny that Daniel, like all of them, was still learning how to recover from old pain. Then, with a lightness that only came from deep familiarity, Christine pivoted the conversation to Tracy. She had spent time with her recently. Off-screen, of course, and described Tracy's enduring grace and humor, how she continued to see the best in people even when the world gave her every reason not to. The moment of reflection gave way to a sharper, more familiar tone when Christine couldn't resist a quick jab at Phyllis. It was subtle but pointed, a remark about the chaos Phyllis always seemed to carry into every room she entered. Danny chuckled, though the tension in his smile hinted at a complex loyalty he still harbored, however reluctantly. Then, after a sip of wine, he changed the subject. He leaned forward and asked Christine whether she might be free that evening, for dinner, dancing, and, perhaps, a bit of romance. She raised an eyebrow with playful skepticism but didn't hesitate in her answer. "All three," she said with a smirk. And just like that, the weight of the past slipped away for a moment, replaced by the giddy flicker of something sweet and real. Meanwhile, at Chancellor Park, an entirely different emotional storm was brewing. Tessa sat under the shade of a wide elm tree with her guitar in hand, patiently guiding Daniel through chord transitions. It wasn't the first lesson, and despite his awkward strumming, Daniel appreciated the calm that came from the exercise. Music had always been something he admired but had never dared to truly learn. Tessa, with her natural talent and gentle instruction, made it feel possible. They had just started working through a stripped-down version of a new song she was composing when Mariah appeared across the field. She had come to support Tessa, maybe to reconnect, maybe just to feel close again. But something shifted when she saw Daniel and Tessa laughing softly together, heads close, the sound of melody binding them. Her chest tightened. She couldn't tell if it was jealousy, anger, or sadness. Perhaps all three. She said nothing, just stood there watching. Daniel noticed her first, then Tessa, whose face fell in quiet recognition. Their eyes met for a brief moment before Mariah turned away sharply, as if the sight had wounded her more than she was prepared to admit. Tessa called after her, voice low, apologetic, and set her guitar down to follow. She caught up to Mariah near the path, tension sharp between them. Mariah dismissed her presence, brushed off the situation like it meant nothing, but her tone betrayed her. It wasn't about Daniel. It was about everything. Tessa tried to soothe the moment, telling Mariah it was nice to see her. But Mariah didn't believe it. "Is it really?" she asked, her voice brittle. Tessa met her gaze and, for the first time in weeks, didn't flinch. "Mariah," she said, "the only person here who hates you is you." The words hit hard, heavier than either of them expected. There was no cruelty in Tessa's voice, only fatigue, the kind that comes from loving someone who has forgotten how to love themselves. Mariah stood there, silent, then turned and walked away. Daniel returned to the bench beneath the elm, strumming absent-mindedly as Tessa stood rooted in place. The sunlight filtered through the branches, painting patches of gold on the grass below. She wondered whether things between her and Mariah had passed the point of repair, or whether, like a song played too many times, the melody had simply changed. Elsewhere, Sharon was beginning to sense the storm brewing beneath the surface of Genoa City's fragile peace. Kane had not reached out again, and that silence was louder than any confrontation. She didn't yet know how deeply his plans ran, but she knew something was coming. Cassidy first had become a target. Not just of acquisition, but of emotional leverage. And if Kane was watching, she would make sure he saw strength, not fear. Back at the Newman estate, Victoria and Claire were finalizing Cole's memorial arrangements. A date was chosen. The location secured. The poem ready. The urn had been selected, a simple, elegant container made of dark cherry wood. Victoria watched her daughter closely, aware of how fragile she still was, and yet, how gracefully she moved through her sorrow. There was strength in Claire that hadn't been there before, something forged in the fire of loss. In the days to come, Genoa City would gather to honor Cole Howard. Old faces would return. Secrets would stir. And amidst it all, Danny would hold a ring in his pocket, waiting for the moment he would finally ask Christine the question his heart had never stopped carrying. But for now, the city held its breath. Grief. Love. Regret. Hope. The rhythm of life in Genoa City never paused. It simply changed tempo. And the music was about to begin again.